Welcome. This is TDL News, and here's what you need to know today. The trade fight between the United States and Canada has officially moved into its next phase. American consumers are growing increasingly uneasy about the economy ahead, and the AI industry is planning hundreds of gigawatts of new gas powered infrastructure. But planning it and actually completing it are two very different things. And in health news, the United States has recorded its first measles deaths of the year, while more employers consider dropping coverage for expensive weight loss drugs. And the entertainment world is remembering Dolly Parton, not only for the music she created, but for the extraordinary ecosystem she built around her name, her work, and her values. Let's begin. Canada is retaliating against the latest round of American tariffs, and this time we have the actual product list. Canada's Department of Finance says the new counter tariffs will cover 27.6 billion Canadian dollars in annual imports from the United States. That is approximately 20 billion US dollars. The duties will range from 15% to 50% and take effect September 8th. The affected products include steel, aluminum, machinery, agricultural equipment, appliances, electronics, and dairy products, to name a few. This isn't a narrow dispute affecting one luxury product that most people can choose to not buy. These are materials, machines, and finished goods that move through manufacturing plants and construction projects, farms, warehouses, retailers, and households every day. Canada is also introducing a 7.5 billion Canadian dollar support package for businesses and workers harmed by the dispute. Some affected companies will be eligible for interest-free loans with repayments delayed for 3 years. The Canadian government said the tariffs are designed to match the latest American duties, dollar for dollar. Officials have also acknowledged that the product list was constructed to place political pressure on specific American states before the November midterm elections. That matters because tariffs are rarely paid in one clean, predictable place. A company importing a product may absorb part of the cost. It may pass those costs on to customers, and it may find other suppliers, and it may also reduce production. Previously approved projects may no longer make financial sense, and this is where the conversation becomes much larger than Canada putting tariffs on some American products. North American supply chains were built on the assumption that materials and components could move between the United States and Canada with relative stability. One product can cross the border multiple times during manufacturing, and a new tariff at each stage can change the final economics of that product. For construction and infrastructure, that creates a particularly dangerous problem. A project may have secured land, it may have financing, and it may have even begun site preparation. But if the price of steel, electrical equipment, machinery, cooling systems, lumber, or other essential inputs changes after the budget was approved, the original financing may no longer be sufficient. The risk is not only that construction never begins. The risk is that construction begins and then can't be completed under the assumptions that made the project possible. That is what businesses, lenders, workers, and local governments need to watch between now and September 8th. American consumers are sending a complicated message about the economy. According to the Conference Board, its Consumer Confidence Index fell to 89.4 in August, the lowest reading since January. But the details matter more than the headline number. Consumers felt somewhat better about present business and employment conditions, but their expectations for the next 6 months deteriorated sharply. People become more pessimistic about future business conditions, employment opportunities, and household income. In written responses, consumers increasingly mentioned prices, oil, gasoline, war, food, trade, and jobs. In other words, many aren't saying that things have already collapsed. What they're saying is that they don't trust what comes next. That uncertainty is beginning to appear in major purchasing decisions. New single family home sales fell 10.5% in July to an annualized rate of 607,000. That's the weakest pace since January. The median new home price fell to just under $400,000, its lowest level in 4 years. But lower prices haven't been enough to overcome high mortgage rates and uncertainty about future income. Only 5.2% of consumers surveyed by the Conference Board said they intended to purchase a home within the next 6 months. That was down from 6.5% in July and represented the largest monthly drop in more than 5 years. This is the part of the economic uncertainty that doesn't always show up immediately in unemployment statistics. People postpone moving to avoid taking on additional debt. They stay in jobs they may otherwise leave, delay starting businesses, and keep older vehicles. When enough households make those defensive decisions simultaneously, the caution itself begins affecting the wider economy. To put it into perspective, home purchases support far more than real estate agents and builders. They support mortgage companies, inspectors, movers, furniture stores, appliance sales, contractors, insurance companies, and local tax revenue. So the question isn't simply whether consumers can afford something today. It's about whether they believe they will be able to afford those things in 6 months. And right now, that confidence is waning. The AI boom is rapidly becoming an energy and infrastructure story. New research from Global Energy Monitor says the United States now has approximately 378 gigawatts of gas-fired power capacity in development. That represents an increase of roughly 50%, with a significant portion connected directly or indirectly to anticipated data center demand. The United States now has more gas generating capacity in development than any other country. But there is a distinction here that we need to make very clearly. In development doesn't mean operating. It doesn't mean financed, fully permitted, or under construction. A project may exist in a corporate announcement, a regulatory filing, a local government proposal, or a utility's long-term plan without ever becoming a functioning facility. And the further the AI build-out expands, the more industries it must compete with for the same physical resources. Data centers require an enormous amount of resources such as land, water, electrical equipment, and enormous amounts of financing. And that's not an exhaustive list. Some electrical equipment manufacturers are already dealing with long delivery schedules. Gas turbine capacity is limited. Costs are rising. Communities are pushing back over utility bills, water use, pollution, noise, and the amount of public support being offered to private technology companies. And now the United States is entering an escalating trade dispute with Canada involving steel, aluminum, machinery, electrical equipment, lumber, plastics, and other industrial inputs, which doesn't mean that every data center project will stop, but one could rationalize that every project shouldn't be evaluated as though its original cost estimates, supply contracts, energy assumptions, and completion schedules will remain untouched. This is why NVIDIA's earnings matter beyond the stock market. Investors will be looking for evidence that the demand for AI computing remains strong. But strong demand doesn't eliminate physical constraints. In fact, stronger demand can intensify those constraints by increasing competition for chips, memory, electricity, construction, capacity, and specialized equipment. The industry may still spend extraordinary amounts of money, but the real question is how much completed, functioning infrastructure that money will ultimately buy. 2 Pennsylvania residents have become the first people in the United States to die from measles this year. Both were unvaccinated residents of Lancaster County. State officials have not released further personal information. According to the Pennsylvania Department of Health, these were the state's first measles deaths in 35 years. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have recorded close to 3,000 confirmed American cases as of August 20th. That makes 2026 the country's worst measles year in more than 3 decades. Measles was declared eliminated in the United States in 2000, indicating that the disease was no longer continuously spreading inside this country. Public health experts generally say communities need vaccination rates near 95% to prevent sustained outbreaks and protect people who can't be vaccinated. Pennsylvania's kindergarten vaccination rate has fallen below that level. In Lancaster County, it was approximately 87.6% during the last school year. This is now more than a debate about individual medical choices, as it has become a public health story about what happens when vaccination rates decline, confidence in institutions wane, and political messaging creates confusion about a disease the country already knew how to control. Some Americans using GLP-1 weight loss medications may lose employer coverage next year. A survey from the Business Group of Health found that approximately 14% of employers had already dropped or planned to drop coverage for these medications in 2027. Employer coverage for weight loss GLP-1 drugs fell from 72% in 2025 to 60% this year. The issue is cost. The group estimates that employer healthcare spending could rise 9.2% next year if companies don't make changes to control expenses. Prescription drugs already represent approximately 1/4 of employer healthcare spending. List prices for some GLP-1 medications range from roughly $500 to more than $1,300 per month, so a medication can remain approved, available, and medically appropriate while becoming financially unreachable for the person expected to take it. That is the distinction between medical innovation and healthcare access. A doctor may recommend the treatment, the patient may respond well to it, but an employer's benefits decision can still determine whether that patient can continue. The entertainment world is remembering Dolly Parton, who died Tuesday in Nashville at the age of 80. Her family announced her death, and tributes have come from musicians, actors, public figures, networks, and fans from around the world. Parton's career spanned more than 6 decades. She wrote approximately 3,000 songs, sold more than 100 million records, crossed from country music into pop, television, and film, and created songs that became cultural landmarks across multiple generations. But Dolly Parton did something else that deserves attention. She built an entire ecosystem around her work. There was Dollywood, which became both a major tourism business and an economic anchor in East Tennessee. And there was the Imagination Library, which has distributed free books to children around the world. Dolly Parton understood the difference between having a successful moment and building something capable of continuing beyond that moment. She didn't abandon the place she came from in order to become globally recognizable. She made where she came from part of the value she created. Her image was unmistakable, but it never existed separately from the work. That is why her death is not simply the loss of a famous entertainer. It is the loss of someone who demonstrated what can happen when creative work is allowed to expand into ownership, institutions, employment, and service. And the latest box office numbers show that audiences have not stopped wanting stories. Spider-Man: Brand New Day reached approximately $855 million at the domestic box office through Sunday, placing it among the highest-grossing North American releases in history. At the same time, Blumhouse's Atomic Monsters horror releases have collectively passed $1 billion worldwide this year. Those are very different types of films, but they point toward the same audience behavior. People are being selective about the events they show up for when they believe that a story will give them an experience that is worth leaving home. It's a sign that the audience hasn't disappeared, but the threshold for earning its attention has definitely risen.